In war, they say the first casualty is truth, but in the aftermath of the greatest interstellar conflict humanity had ever known, one man discovered that the last casualty might be hatred itself. This is a story of how the smallest acts of compassion can reshape worlds and how sometimes the bravest thing a warrior can do is extend a hand to his enemy. The familiar hum of the transport pod pierced the dawn's silence as Josh Marshall approached the crystalline spires of the Xantian settlement. Through the curved viewport, the twin suns of New Alexandria painted the alien architecture in hues of amber and rose, each faceted surface catching and splitting the light into rainbow fragments. Even after 5 years of peace, the sight still caught in his throat, not for its beauty, but for how different it looked from the smoldering ruins he remembered from the war. His weathered hands gripped the pod's controls tighter as memories surfaced unbidden. Proximus 7th. The burning sky, the choice that had ended his military career but started something far more significant. The pod's navigation system chimed, pulling him back to the present as the ancient dojo came into view, its six-sided architecture a testament to traditions older than humanity's first stumbling steps into space. Marika waited at the entrance, her iridescent skin shifting through shades of blue and violet, emotions she couldn't hide, even if protocol demanded it. Her six-limbed form moved with the fluid grace characteristic of her species, but Josh noticed the slight stiffness in her posture, the way her secondary arms clasped tightly against her thorax. Her son had been difficult again. "Honored teacher," she greeted him, the translator converting her clicks and whistles into the smooth tones of standard English. "My son awaits your instruction." The pause before instruction spoke volumes about what had transpired that morning. Inside the dojo, the young Xantian moved through his forms with mechanical precision. 6 limbs struck the air in perfect synchronization, each movement exactly as the ancient texts prescribed. Too perfect, too rigid, too predictable. Josh watched silently, remembering another young warrior who had thought perfection lay in following every rule, every tradition, right up until the moment those rules had failed him in actual combat. The morning light filtered through the translucent panels, casting long shadows across the training mat. In one corner, the Chandur observed with his characteristic stillness, his feline features betraying nothing of the thoughts behind those golden eyes. But Josh knew better. 5 years ago, he had pulled the Chandur's broken body from the wreckage of a fallen warship, defying orders and changing both their lives forever. The young Xantian finished his form and turned to face Josh, his skin flushing purple with barely contained eagerness. Today's lesson would be about more than just combat. It would be about breaking patterns, about understanding that true strength comes not from perfection, but from adaptation, about learning that sometimes the most unexpected path leads to the greatest victory. The young Xantian bowed, his 6 limbs moving in the intricate pattern demanded by tradition. Josh returned the gesture with a simple human bow, the contrast between their movements a visible reminder of their differences. Around them, the dojo held its breath. "Begin!" The Chandur's deep voice resonated through the chamber. The match unfolded like a dance choreographed by opposing choreographers. The young Xantian's attacks came in perfect succession, a high strike with his upper limbs, followed by a sweeping motion from his middle pair, while his lower limbs maintained textbook balance. Each movement flowed into the next with practiced precision, exactly as generations of Xantian warriors had been taught. Josh moved differently. Where his opponent was all precision and power, he was economy and intuition. A slight shift here, a minimal step there. He didn't so much defend against the attacks as he simply wasn't where they landed. The frustration began to show in his opponent's skin, purple deepening to an almost black shade. The young Xantian's attacks grew faster, more aggressive. Josh caught glimpses of Marika in the doorway, her skin rippling with concern for her son. Behind her, other Xantians had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Some wore the expressions of those who expected, perhaps hoped, to see the human finally fail. They didn't understand. This wasn't about winning or losing. It was about teaching a lesson that had taken humanity centuries to learn, that strength alone wasn't enough, that perfect technique couldn't account for every situation, that sometimes the best defense was simply being unexpected. The end came suddenly. The young Xantian, frustrated by his inability to land a solid hit, committed fully to a traditional rushing attack. Josh's foot found its place, and gravity did the rest. In the silence that followed the fall, the only sound was the soft hum of the environmental systems. Human Josh wins again, the Chandur announced, his voice carrying a weight beyond the simple declaration, "Show respect." As the young Xantian performed his complex curtsy and Josh offered his bow, the air grew thick with unspoken accusations. The gathered crowd murmured, their translators creating a symphony of whispered disapproval, but before the situation could escalate, Josh spoke. "Your technique was flawless," he said to his fallen student. "Every movement exactly as prescribed by the ancient texts. That was your mistake." The young Xantian's skin flushed darker. "We do not understand, teacher. We followed every teaching, every tradition. How could this be wrong?" Josh glanced at the Chandur, seeing in those feline eyes the same understanding they had shared in a prisoner of war camp years ago. Because in following every rule perfectly, you became perfectly predictable. Real combat, real life, isn't about following patterns. It's about adapting when those patterns fail. The lesson hung in the air, its implications reaching far beyond the confines of the dojo. In the doorway, Marika's skin had shifted to the deep blue of revelation. The Chandur's tail twitched, a gesture Josh had learned meant approval, and in the young Xantian's eyes, the first glimmer of understanding began to dawn. The crowd dispersed, leaving behind whispers that would soon spread through the settlement like ripples in a still pond. Josh watched them go, noting how some of the older Xantians cast disapproving glances at the Chandur. 5 years of peace hadn't erased generations of distrust. In the quiet that followed, the Chandur invited Josh to tea, a ritual that had become their post-training tradition. The dojo's small kitchen was a curious blend of Xantian efficiency and Chandur aesthetics, with its 6-sided cups and feline-friendly seating arrangements. As steam rose from their cups, memories rose with it. "You're thinking of Proxima 7th again," the Chandur observed, his whiskers twitching. "I see it in your eyes." Josh stared into his tea, watching the leaves swirl. "The memories come back stronger these days. Maybe it's because of what's coming." The Festival of Reconciliation loomed on the horizon, a political powder keg disguised as a celebration. 5 years of fragile peace, built on treaties signed by leaders who had never seen the front lines, who had never had to look into the eyes of those they called enemy. "My young student's mother was watching today," the Chandur said, changing the subject with characteristic grace. "Her colors were interesting." Josh smiled despite himself. "Marika's colors are always interesting when you're around, old friend. You should speak to her." "It's not that simple." The Chandur's tail twitched anxiously. "Her husband was lost in the war, like your clan, like so many others." Josh set down his cup. "But we're not at war anymore." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside. Through the kitchen window, they could see a group of young Xantians confronting Josh's student, their colors showing aggression. The boy's posture was defensive, but he wasn't backing down. "They may mock him for learning from a human," the Chandur observed quietly, "just as some mock me for teaching alongside one." Josh rose, but the Chandur's tail blocked his path. "Watch," he said. The young Xantian faced his tormentors, but instead of falling into the traditional defensive stance, he shifted his weight in a distinctly human way. The other Xantians hesitated, thrown off by the unexpected posture. In that moment of confusion, Marika appeared, her authority as a war widow sending the troublemakers scurrying. "Learning," Josh said softly, "not just the movements, but the meaning behind them." "As are we all," the Chandur replied, his eyes fixed on Marika's retreating form. Later that evening, as Josh prepared to leave, he found his student waiting by the transport pod. The young Xantian's colors had shifted to the deep blue of serious thought. "Teacher," he said, his translator struggling with the emotion in his voice, "why did you choose to teach me, after everything that happened in the war?" Josh looked up at the crystalline spires of the settlement, now bathed in the light of setting suns. "Because someone once taught me that the hardest person to fight is the one who refuses to be your enemy." The Chandur's words hung in the air as Josh left the dojo, his mind already on his next destination. The transport pod hummed to life, carrying him toward the industrial sector where Talara, his Centaurian friend, maintained her workshop. The gleaming metal structures were a stark contrast to the organic architecture of the Xantian settlement. Talara's story was different from the Chandur's, but no less significant. Her entire family had been lost when the orbital bombardment destroyed the Centaurian shipyards. Now she channeled her grief into rebuilding, not just machines but trust between species. Her workshop had become a symbol of cooperation, employing technicians from various races who would have once been mortal enemies. "Josh," she greeted him, her crystalline voice resonating through the workshop. "You're just in time to see the new atmospheric processes, human design, Xantian materials, Centaurian precision." The upcoming Festival of Reconciliation weighed heavily on Josh's mind as he examined Talara's work. 5 years of peace had brought progress, but also resistance. Conservative factions on all sides viewed such cooperation as cultural contamination. The festival would bring these tensions to the surface. His next stop was the military district, where Crix, the former Xantian commander, now ran a veterans integration program. The irony wasn't lost on Josh. The same warrior who had once led charges against human positions now worked to help former soldiers find their place in peacetime. "The young ones are the hardest," Crix explained, his skin shifting through shades of concern. "They were raised on stories of glory, trained for war. Peace requires different skills." As the twin suns began to set, Josh made his final visit of the day. The memorial garden stood at the edge of the settlement, its twisted metal sculptures incorporating debris from the war. Here, names of the fallen from all species were etched in their native scripts, a testament to the cost of conflict and the price of peace. The festival preparations were visible from the garden, temporary structures rising, security protocols being established, delegates from various species arriving. Josh knew that somewhere in the gathering crowd, extremists were planning to disrupt the celebrations, to reignite the flames of hatred that had nearly consumed them all. But he also knew that the seeds of understanding he had planted, in the dojo, in Talara's workshop, in Crix's program, and in countless other small moments of connection, had taken root. The young Xantian's growing comprehension, the Chandur's blossoming relationship with Marika, Talara's collaborative projects, and Crix's work with veterans were all flowers blooming in what had once been scorched earth. As night fell over New Alexandria, Josh stood at the memorial, remembering Proxima 7th and the choice that had changed everything. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to bridge the divides between species. But for now, he allowed himself to hope that perhaps the greatest victory wasn't winning the war, but winning the peace that followed. The Festival of Reconciliation dawned under the twin suns, transforming the central plaza into a kaleidoscope of cultures. Crystalline pavilions housed delegates from a dozen worlds, their architectures blending in ways that would have been unthinkable during the war. The air hummed with translated conversations, creating a symphony of understanding, or at least attempts at it. Josh arrived early, noting the increased security presence. Xantian guards stood alongside human peacekeepers, their discomfort evident in subtle color changes and rigid postures. Near the main stage, Talara supervised the final adjustments to the atmospheric processes, ensuring comfortable conditions for all species present. The Chandur appeared at his side, moving with characteristic silence despite his size. "The conservative factions are here," he murmured. 3 different groups, by my count." 4, Josh corrected, scanning the crowd. "The human purity movement sent representatives. They're trying to blend in, but their posture gives them away. Military training." The festival's opening ceremony began with traditional displays from each species. The young Xantian performed alongside other students, their movements now incorporating elements from various martial arts traditions. Josh watched with pride as his student demonstrated the adaptation he'd learned, his techniques fluid and unpredictable. But tension crackled beneath the surface of civility. Josh caught glimpses of Crix moving through the crowd, his security team quietly tracking known agitators. Marika stood with other diplomatic representatives, her colors shifting anxiously whenever the Chandur passed nearby. The crisis erupted during the unity ceremony. As representatives from each species stepped forward to sign a new cooperative agreement, a disruption rippled through the crowd. The human purity movement made their move simultaneously with Xantian separatists, creating chaos from multiple directions. What happened next would be remembered as a turning point. The young Xantian, seeing the danger to the delegates, moved to protect them, not with traditional Xantian combat forms, but with an improvised blend of techniques that caught the attackers off guard. The Chandur and Marika worked in perfect synchronization, their actions demonstrating the strength of cooperation. Talara's atmospheric processes proved crucial, allowing her to adjust environmental conditions to disorient the attackers without harming peaceful attendees. Crix veterans, instead of falling back on combat training, formed a protective barrier between the extremists and the crowd. Josh found himself facing a former human soldier, one whose face bore the scars of Proxima 7th. "You're a traitor to your species," the man snarled. "No," Josh replied calmly, shifting his stance in a way that combined human and Xantian techniques. "I'm loyal to something bigger than species." The confrontation ended not with violence, but with understanding. The young Xantian's actions inspired others to step forward, each sharing stories of how cooperation had enriched their lives. The Chandur and Marika publicly acknowledged their relationship, challenging ancient prejudices with the simple power of their connection. As the crisis subsided, the festival transformed into something more authentic than its planned ceremonies. Species mingled freely, sharing not just diplomatic pleasantries but genuine conversations. In one corner, the young Xantian taught human children a simplified version of his art, while nearby, Tolara explained the principles of cross-species engineering to an fascinated audience. The day ended with an unplanned addition to the Unity ceremony. The memorial garden was expanded to include a new section, not for the war dead, but for the living who had chosen to build peace. Josh's name was there, alongside the Chandurs, Talaras, Crixes, and many others. As twilight painted New Alexandria's spires in deepening shades of purple and gold, the festival's unexpected triumph rippled through the settlement like a healing wave. In the dojo, now transformed into an impromptu gathering space, species that had once fought to annihilate each other shared meals and stories. The young Xantian sat cross-legged, a distinctly human posture that would have been unthinkable weeks ago, surrounded by a mixed group of children. His skin glowed with pride as he demonstrated how different fighting styles could complement each other. His mother, Marika, watched from the doorway, her colors shifting through shades of contentment as the Chandur stood beside her, their closeness now open for all to see. "You knew this would happen," the Chandur said quietly as Josh approached. "Not the attack, perhaps, but this," he gestured to the gathered crowd. Josh smiled, remembering that day on Proxima 7th. "I hoped. Sometimes hope is enough." The aftermath of the festival brought changes that even Josh hadn't anticipated. The dojo expanded, becoming the first interspecies academy of martial arts and cultural understanding. The young Xantian, once bound by rigid traditions, became its youngest instructor, teaching students that strength comes in many forms. Talara's workshop grew into a center for technological cooperation, where innovations born from different species' perspectives solved problems that had once seemed insurmountable. Crix's veteran program evolved into a cultural exchange initiative, turning former soldiers into ambassadors of peace. But perhaps the most significant change was the quiet ceremony held 3 months later, when the Chandur and Marika formalized their union, becoming the first officially recognized cross-species couple in the settlement's history. The young Xantian stood proudly beside them, his skin shimmering with joy, as he gained not just a father figure, but a living example of how barriers could be broken. As the twin suns set on that historic day, Josh stood once again in the memorial garden. The twisted metal sculptures now bore new inscriptions, not just names of the fallen, but stories of reconciliation. His fingers traced the words etched in multiple scripts. "Peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of understanding." A sound made him turn. His former student approached, accompanied by a small group of mixed-species children, eager for their next lesson. The young Xantian's colors showed a maturity that went beyond his years. "Teacher," he said, "we are ready to begin." Josh looked at the future before him, at the children who would grow up knowing cooperation instead of conflict, at the city where different species now lived and worked together, at the stars above that no longer seemed to hold enemies, but new possibilities for connection. "No," he replied with a smile, "we already began, now we continue." And in the growing darkness, as the lights of New Alexandria sparkled like earthbound stars, the sounds of shared laughter and mingled voices rose into the night air, a symphony of unexpected harmony, a testament to the power of choosing understanding over hatred, of reaching across divides, of daring to be unexpected. The war had ended 5 years ago, but the real victory, the victory of peace, was only just beginning. If this story of unexpected friendship and hope touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more compelling intergalactic tales. Turn on the notification bell to be the first to know when we release new stories of courage, redemption, and cross-species understanding. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that peace begins with a single unexpected act of kindness. Until our next adventure among the stars, this is Stellar Stories, reminding you that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is extend a hand to those we once called enemies.